Hey folks, so I'm just going to take you through the basics of getting set up on Reaper and how to just get your sound effects layered up so that you can export those sound effects or render them, as Reaper calls it, for another application like Fmod, and just covering some of the common kind of pitfall things that can go wrong, mainly when it comes to project saving and making sure all your files are saved with it. So let's go ahead and download Reaper. You can download the Windows 64-bit version and you get a file that you can open, and I'm just going to open Reaper now. I already have it downloaded, of course, and it looks something like this. Now I've reset my Reaper factory settings to make sure that it's kind of behaving for me here the same way as it will for you. So yeah, it should be matched the way you have it right now, but it's highly configurable, but I'm not going to do that now. I'm just going to keep it super simple. I'm just going to expand it at the top by double clicking. And this is where we drop audio. There's no tracks yet. If we want to, we can even make the tracks first by just double clicking here, and I should be able to undo, Control Z. We notice down the bottom that we have our mixer. It's just kind of showing us a repeat of what we've got here. So we don't really need to have that at the same time, at least now, maybe later. But for now, I'm just going to close that by clicking the tiny little X all the way down here. Hopefully you can see that. I've just noticed the X is just off the edge of the screen capture. Just going to make sure it is actually there. Great, you can see it. So if you don't see those little tabs, those X's, you can actually go to View and you can close it from here if you prefer. So you can see that these windows are open. I'm just going to click on the mixer, and that's the same as pressing the X. So now we have Reaper nice and big. I can delete these tracks and re-add them as I like. Now your tracks might look slightly different to mine. Don't worry about that. It's just Reaper has different themes, and mine is set to default, but sometimes it gives you a different theme if you freshly install it, whereas I think it may have carried across mine from before. But it doesn't really matter. It's just a different view. I mean, it's actually quite weird to use a different theme because you get very used to it. So I tend to leave mine on the default, which should be very similar to yours. You can actually make it look like other programs, which is quite cool. But let me just put that back. Whoops, I just opened the theme adjuster instead on the other screen, so I'm just going to put it back to default. Okay, so basics with Reaper. I think it might be useful just to get some sort of audio in there, just so we can see some audio in Reaper. So what we can do is go on to Freesound and just start downloading assets once we have an account. That's my silly name. I'll search for cat meow, let's say, or dog bark, whatever. We have different sound effects here with different lengths, and these sound effects are usually quite noisy, so they can be a bit unsuitable for game sound, so you have to kind of go through and find ones that are very clean. Actually, one nice way to know that it's quite clean is just by looking at it. There should be a nice difference between the audio, like of the cat meowing, and the background kind of noise. So it's always good to look out for that. So this one looks like it might be kind of cleaner than the other one. Let me just... Oh, no, not hearing that. Can barely hear that. So this is sort of a typical example of how you might want a sound, but there's a lot of noise in it. So I'll download this because it might be good to show you how to go about removing some of that background noise. And back to Reaper, let me just get the file in there. Oh, it didn't actually download it. Now it's downloading. And I'm just going to drag the file into Reaper and release. And there we go. And one thing that I find funny with Reaper by default is that it zooms into your cursor position, which is here. I don't like that. That would be one of the first things that I would change. And you don't have to change it. You can just click on the cursor and it will focus on where the cursor is. So it's up to you, but if you wanted to change it, that's one of many things in the menu which you access by just double clicking up here. and then you get this pop-up. All my pop-ups are coming on the left screen, sorry. But yeah, you can actually just search for something like zoom here, and it will show you all the places where you can set zoom settings. And we've, just by pressing the find button a few times, we've managed to find that setting. So I can change this to make it zoom where the center of view is, or where the mouse cursor is, if I want to change the way it zooms with the middle mouse button. But I'll leave it for default because I like to leave it, at least on this computer, which isn't my main one, I like to leave it the same as what I would expect you to have it as, so we don't get confused. So yeah, here's a track. They're all the same. It doesn't matter which one you put it on. Notice how it will automatically name the track with the first sound effect that you drop in. That's fine, doesn't matter. And we can expand it like this, and then we can zoom in as well. So there's a shortcut. If you hold Control and then use the mouse wheel, it will zoom all the tracks together. So between the mouse wheel and holding Control as a modifier, we can get nice control over how we're viewing our waveform. So notice how if you click away from Reaper, it will stop using the waveform, and that's fine. You click back on Reaper and it will appear again. I'm just clicking on my other screen. If we click on the wave, well, that's fine, yeah. So it's a single click and it will move the cursor, and it will also highlight the file. If you had many files, which you might do, for example, if you press S, it will split where the cursor is, and it's doing it to grid lines here because we have this grid enable. If you wanted to select several audio files, that's a right mouse click and drag marquee selection, it's called. So we could actually do that, or we could undo. So the split is a S shortcut, and that's really useful because then we can then trim from either edge. Now, as I mentioned before, the magnet is snap, and that's pretty useful because everything gets snapped to the grid. And the grid settings are determined by the ruler at the top, which is set to measures and beats. We can set it to time if we prefer. And to change the grid lines, it's actually Alt and L for the grid settings. And we can make sure that that's showing us frames, which is time instead of beats. So the grid can be anything we want it to be. It's nice to be able to change what the grid is. It doesn't really matter to you at this point, but I will just set it back just so, again, so that it's as it was by default. And I'll set this back, measures and beats. But the point is, and let's just press escape to get rid of this time selection. Time selection, escape. The point is that the magnet here will snap everything to grid, including when we press S. But we don't necessarily want that. It's helpful when it comes to lining up sounds together if we have many. And it's also helpful for making sure that we make a selection in line with the start of the sound. But there's different, better ways to do that. So let's turn it off for now. And let's say we do some editing, try and get this meow. Spacebar. So now, because the magnet is off, snap is off, I've got much finer control over where I'm editing. And I can change the handles here. And I can try and narrow this down so it's just a meow and not the background noise. Now that's still very noisy, so it's not really ideal. I'm not sure if you can hear that, but it's much better than what it was. So that's kind of the basics of editing. And let's say we have several cat meows together. Let's just say for some reason we were designing a sound that was different cat meows in quick succession. This is just an example of how to do some basic editing. Another shortcut, by the way, is if you use the middle mouse scroll over the tracks here, it will scroll up and down. Let's say we have a load of different tracks here. I'm just double clicking here. And if we're really zoomed in, we want to go up and down. It does that by moving the mouse pointer over here and going up and down there. Whereas if we do it on the timeline, it scrolls horizontally. So that's nice. Let's go back to where we were, and I'm going to hold Control mouse and back up again. Let's say we are making a sound, which, as I said before, requires just layering different things up, and we can move them around in time and get different results. So there's a silly sound. And let's say we need to export this as one sound for integration into audio middleware such as Fmod. Well, there's a couple of ways we can do it. The first way is we can turn Snap on, highlight our sounds, drag them, and I think because I clicked that one first, it's going off that one's start position, not this one. So I might just reorder the tracks and see if that makes a difference. Let me just try that again. Yeah, it seems to be going off the one that I clicked first. So whichever one I highlighted first seems to be snapping. So it's quite clever like that. But yeah, sometimes it does something that we don't plan. But in this case, I'm just going to make sure my first sound is kind of on top, if you want to change the order. And then I'm just dragging it to the grid. And then I can click and drag here. Now, it's not really good that we're exporting silence between the last sound effect and the end here. Because when we go to export, which is File and Render, we have the option to select what we're exporting, and it should be time selection. Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to do things, but I think when you're starting off, having it as time selection is probably best. And you need to tell it where to go, and this would be your working folder, wherever that is on your computer, which will be backed up onto an external hard drive after every day's work. I would say just copy and paste the entire folder, and you name the file here, and that will render the file to that location. But yeah, as I say, it's not great that we're exporting the sound effect, which is going to bake these three into one, and then this much silence here afterwards. So what I would do would be to turn that off, and you could click and drag the handle here, or you can have that off from the beginning and not worry about lining things up in that way, because there's a shortcut for this that is really useful. And it involves selecting the sounds you want to export and then going Command and S. Oh no, that's because I've changed, my Command S is different. So in this case, we could just make a manual selection. Now, if we want to actually make the time selection perfectly match where we have our items, irrespective of whether or not they're on a grid line, we have a nice action for that. So let's go into the action list by pressing exclamation mark on the keyboard, and this unlocks the full power of Reaper. These are all the things that we can do in Reaper. So in the action list, oh, my cat is coming to say hi. In the action list, I'm trying to tell Reaper to make a time selection from these items. Essentially, I don't have to do this manual action like this. So let's just search for item time selection. And it could be that we can actually find the shortcut that we want. Let me just have a quick scan. So here, set time selection to items. And what I can do is I can run this here, run. Or I can assign a shortcut by pressing add, and then I could say something like Shift S or Control S. Let's just see if Shift S is available, the shortcut. Oh, it's actually, that's quite a good one to have, so I'm not going to overwrite that one. I'm going to overwrite the save shortcut, which is Control S, because I like to save as in a different way and manually making sure it's saving properly. So Control S, okay, it's going to overwrite that shortcut of saving the project. That's fine, I can do it through the file menu. Okay, and now when I press Control S, it's going to set the time selection to the items that we have selected. So it's quite cool. Okay, and once we have that time selection covering all of our items, we have another shortcut to make a region from our selection. And I know that the default one for this one is Shift and OR, so that will now make a region at the top here. And regions are really useful because once we make a region, irrespective of whatever time selection we have, we always have that region selected, and we can come back and we can double click on the region and it'll highlight there again. So regions are a nice way of just kind of saying, okay, here is the sound effect bit, and I can hold Shift and double click on the region, and I can even name the region. And then it will always be obvious to me whenever I've got a huge project. It'll always be clear to me where the cat purr sound effect is, and I can always select it that way. And then when I go to render off that region, it'll always be ready to be rendered, and I can select time selection. So that's kind of a bit of the basics of Reaper. At that point, I would say that there's not a huge amount that you would need to know extra at this stage, although there's so many things I could go through. But if I was to just do a couple more things maybe as to what you might do next in terms of organizing your project, I would recommend that if you do have, let's say, a sound, let's say you've got these three baked into a sound, what I would recommend doing would be, you can get rid of that just to keep it nice and tidy. You can control click tracks, and then you can drag. So notice the blue line. If I drag these three into track 1, the blue line kind of has a little ident. It kind of, see how that kind of moves across a bit? That's indicating that when you release it like that, it will actually nest those 3 tracks into one. And that way, if I change the volume of track 1, or if I do anything to track 1 in terms of effects, which I may or may not cover, it will apply that to all of the tracks inside. And just to make things super clear, I will click the first and shift click the last, track color, and I can assign a color to these tracks just to have some sort of indicator to make it obvious that like these 4 tracks are all the cat and they're controlled by the parent. This is the parent track and these are the 3 children. And then if you want to, that's the approach that you might take to designing all your sounds. I mean, it's perfectly fine to just design multiple sounds using the same tracks. The only time that it becomes a problem is if you start changing anything over here in terms of volume or effects. It's actually going to apply to everything on those tracks, so bear that in mind. Oh, very important, I should say, with Reaper is actually saving your work. So there's a difference between saving and exporting. So like I said earlier, rendering or exporting is baking your audio down to one MP3. It really should be a WAV. So this should be selected to WAV, and that should be 44. And stereo is fine for now. Let's say you're exporting, you'll point it to a certain directory with your name, and you can call it whatever you like. And if once you're happy with your settings, that should be on time selection, you can actually save these settings here as a preset. So you can say save preset, and you can call it whatever you want, your initials or something, so that if this is not as it should be, just go into presets and say all settings, initials, and it will go to what you've told it to, except for the file name. So that's nice, but we want to save the Reaper project in such a way where it actually saves the audio files as well, because if you don't do that, you might clean your downloads folder out or whatever, and even though the Reaper project is saved, it will open up with these files missing if you don't actually do this thing, which is save project as. And this is really important. It's so important that I would recommend adding it up here, because you can customize anything you want with Reaper. So if I say customize toolbar, and I can add the action to save as, save project as, select, and then it's actually added it here. And I can even change the text. My voice is a bit gone, sorry, too much talking today. And now, oh, well, it should say save as. Maybe to make it 2 words. There we go. Apply, boom. And now it's here. Save as is right there. I mean, I could go file, save as, save project as, but I like to make life easier, and you can customize Reaper so much. That's what's so great about it. So if I click save as, it's the same as going file save as now. You must remember to have this selected. Copy all media into project directory. And if you don't do that, it's not going to save the audio. So if I do this and then save, this audio is then captured into wherever I point the Reaper save. And any audio that I add in from that point, it's not going to get saved unless I save as again. So every time you save Reaper, save as, copy all media, every time. And that should remember, that setting will remember. So you just have to remember to save as, and that's why I put that there. It's really important. In fact, it's so important that maybe I can do anything like make this red or give it, yeah, I don't know. I can give it a special icon, but whatever, that's fine. And that's it. So that's how you save all your files, export everything from Reaper. And if you have any questions, let me know. There's a couple of things that I would just say. If you're working with video in Reaper, go onto the VLC site and download VLC, but make sure you have the 64-bit version. And the reason for that is that comes with special video codecs that Reaper uses, FFmpeg codecs, and that's really useful for working to video. You're going to need that if you're ever working to video, which you can do because you can do screen grabs and you can actually sound design to a video. So that's kind of outside of the scope of this particular tutorial, but I think we've covered the basics. So yeah, there we go. Let me know if you have any questions or anything that you can't figure out. Just remember, question mark, action list, really useful. These are items, this is a region, this is a time selection, this is the cursor, this is what I'm moving is the mouse cursor, and this is the play cursor, the green line. That basic terminology should get you a fair way. And yeah, that's it. Speak soon.